on this third and final session of the conference. We're going to have two talks and then some closing remarks from Andrew Murphy, the Professor of GP. And the first talk is going to be from Edel Murphy and Joe Murphy. So Edel is the National Research Officer with Tusla Child and Family Agency and a national partner on the PPI Ignite National Network. And she also works with us here in the primary care CTNI, facilitating our PPI group meetings. And then Joe has 30 years of experience as a quality manager in industry. And he's also a PPI contributor since 2017, working with the Health Research Board and with Tusla's research ethics committees. So Edel and Joe are going to talk to us about embedding PPI in research ethics structures. So over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Edel Tierney. I'm National Research Officer with Tusla Child and Family Agency, and I'm presenting today with my colleague Joe Murphy, who's a public contributor on Tusla's Independent Research Ethics Committee. So we're going to talk to you about how we embedded PPI in Tusla's research ethics processes and structures. I'm going to share some slides with you now. So today we're going to talk to you about how we went about embedding PPI in Tusla's research ethics structures, and specifically with the focus on developing our research ethics committee. So for those of you who don't know who or what Tusla is, we are the dedicated state agency responsible for improving the well-being and outcome for children and families in Ireland. We support and promote the development, welfare and protection of children and the effective functionings of families. We provide a range of universal and targeted services, and these include child protection welfare services, education welfare services, psychological services, alternative care, including foster care and residential care, family locally based community supports, early years services, and domestic sexual and gender-based violence services. So how does PPI then underpin Tusla's operations? Well, Tusla's founding legislation, the Child and Family Agency Act in 2013, places a very strong focus and emphasis on partnership and cooperation with children and families in the delivery of all of these services. We have a child and youth participation strategy, and this sets out Tusla's plans to nurture and celebrate participatory practice within Tusla and its funded agencies. And indeed, our national approaches to practice, such as science of safety and MEHLA principles embedded, such as inclusion, the co-production of plans with children, their families and their networks. So in the National Research Office then, we endeavour to keep the voice of children and young people at the core of our work. And we've done this in a number of ways. So for example, we've recently commissioned a research project on children and young people's experiences of child protection and welfare. And we sought the contribution and consulted with children and young people on the tender for that research, how we should go about it, the research design, the types of questions we should ask, etc. We've also put a PPI approach in our research ethics committee application. Joe might be able to tell you a little bit more about that in a while. And today we're going to talk to you about how we went about having PPI contributors on Tusla's Independent Research Ethics Committee. So how do we define PPI in research in Tusla Child and Family Agency? Well, in terms of the terms themselves, public and patient is probably not a term that we use very often in Tusla, but by this term we mean children and young people, those attending Tusla services, including potential users of services, parents, carers, guardians, staff, members of the public who are interested in research and the type of services that we provide in Tusla, and anyone involved in the care and protection of children and young people. In terms of involvement then, we mean the active involvement between children and young people and those who use services, whether they're parents, carers, guardians, staff, and so on, as collaborators in the research process. So we're not talking about involvement as research participants or research subjects in the research, and we do not mean the generation of data for research projects. So how did we start this process? Where did it begin and what did we do? Well, I suppose in Tusla's research strategy, 2015 to 2017, we did have an objective, which was to develop an independent research ethics committee for the agency. And as part of this process, we wanted to have the voice of PPI contributors on that independent research ethics committee. And it started with a number of consultations with individuals across our networks, including the PPI Ignite at NUI Galway, PPI Ignite at TCD, and some individuals like chairpersons from a research ethics committee and people we knew who had an interest in PPI and research. This led us to have a roundtable discussion in February of 2020, where we invited a number of interested parties from across the PPI Ignite at NUI Galway, PPI Ignite at TCD, some contributors from our academic institutions, and public contributors from public advisory groups whom we knew had worked in this space. We had a discussion around what that would look like to have PPI contributors on the Research Ethics Committee and what considerations we would need to take into account. This led to us developing a guidance document and expressions of interest for the recruitment process. So the expressions of interest, indeed, we got advice and we consulted with public contributors known to us who had been at the roundtable discussion and outside of that, who could advise us on the content, the format, the look of the expression of interest, but also who could share it among their networks. Following the expressions of interest, we went about recruitment through a skills match interview process. And this led us to have 11 PPI contributors on Tusla's Independent Research Ethics Committee. And indeed, those 11 PPI contributors did attend the induction training of all the members of the Research Ethics Committee. So the outputs then from that roundtable discussion in terms of PPI, we had this paper entitled Principles for Involving PPI Contributors on an Independent Research Ethics Committee. And within that paper, we set out our principles and our goals and objectives for what a public contributor role might look like on our Independent Research Ethics Committee and what kind of supports we would need to have in place. The induction training program that I spoke about a moment ago was informed by this consultation process. And indeed, during discussions, we had talked about things like what would happen in the event that somebody became distressed or that there was a very emotional topic that might be close to the bone for some PPI contributors. So this led us to develop a clear disclosure protocol within our standard operating procedures. And we also developed a distress protocol as a safety net to have that in support for all Research Ethics Committee members. And the recruitment approach, which I spoke about, that skills match interview process, that was developed in line with the consultation and included a culture of inclusion and respect. So we now have an independent and impartial Research Ethics Committee for Tusla Child and Family Agency. This Research Ethics Committee is formally approved by the board and reports to a subcommittee of the board. Its operations are supported by Tusla's National Research Office. So I'm going to hand you over now to my colleague, Joe Murphy, who's going to talk to you about his journey on joining the Independent Research Ethics Committee of Tusla.
Thanks very much, Edel. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you today. And I suppose what I am is a PPI representative on the Tusla Research Ethics Committee. So I'll start off with a little bit of background, I suppose, how I ended up on the Research Ethics Committee. About 5 years ago or so, I was in the job I was in, I was changing jobs, and I heard the HRB looking for PPI membership to review research papers and the like. So I decided I'd apply for that, and I was lucky enough to be accepted as a PPI member, not really knowing what PPI stood for or whatever. So over the last 5 years, I've had experience of being involved in working with the HRB on reviewing research papers, different types of research papers, and primarily looking at them from a PPI perspective, looking at the impact on the patient, looking at the impact on from a public point of view, and making sure that the appropriate involvement was present in the research. And as the years have gone along, it's become very clear that this is a requirement for research now, that there is a an involvement by the patient or maybe the service user and the public in relation to all research. So as part of that, as Edel said, that when Tusla decided that they were going to bring PPI onto their research ethics committee, any members of the PPI with the HRB were asked if they'd be interested in joining this. And I was immediately drawn to I suppose, to the ethics committee, the idea of having PPI and the ethics committee of Tusla. Tusla in particular, I guess, because of the, I suppose, fantastic service that Tusla offer. You know, it is unique in relation to the service it provides. And also, I suppose, to be able to contribute a bit to the ongoing improvement of a fine organization like Tusla. I think we're inundated with evidence of what things are going wrong, and it's through research that there's continuous improvement, and we found, you know, the great opportunity here to maybe contribute to that. So I put my name forward and was brought on to the interview process, and that interview process was very it was a serious process but very engaging process, in the fact that the interview committee were, I suppose, looking for experience primarily. I suppose what I was bringing to the party was experience of PPI through research in general, but they were also probably looking at the participants and, I suppose, ability to work with cross-functional teams and the like, you know. So I think I was lucky enough to get through that process. So next slide. So I suppose what after the interview process, and I still remember the day I got notification I was invited to participate. I was delighted to get the opportunity, and I think you start off. It was about the early of 2021, and obviously it was very professional from start to finish in relation to you know, the clear that there was a new research ethics committee, an independent research ethics committee being formed. It was a majority, it was new membership, and as Edel has said, that there were 11 PPI contributors to it, but probably about a total about 16 members, but 5 were members of Tusla, and the rest were from different backgrounds. And it was that diversity in relation to the membership was really, really intriguing. Myself and one other person, the experience we were bringing, I suppose, was very much around having been involved in PPI in research, but a lot of other members from a point of view of service users from different groups and the like. So there was huge diversity in that. So we were brought through a very detailed induction program. Tusla put in a lot of work into preparing induction, because again, to integrate, I suppose, PPI into an ethics committee as opposed to just pure research is different. So, and particularly, I suppose that there were 6 different modules that were presented to us in relation to the introduction to Tusla itself, in relation to what it did. A very good session in relation to ethics, and particularly in relation to research associated with children and some of the challenges that are out there. And then over the next sessions, we've started to look at the operating procedures, like what Edel has mentioned, the distress protocols, all the different things, because the variety of topics that can come up under this are varied, some very challenging situations. And I suppose it was all preparing us for that type of an environment. So as the induction went ahead, we got more into what the actual the form would be like that we'll be reviewing as research ethics committee groups, and then later on it was into the actual mechanics of how the actual meetings run and what's required and how we're going to work on things. So overall, listen, it was very interactive. In the last session, a lot of the senior management from a Tusla perspective joined us and clearly shown their complete support and support from us in relation to the role we were partaking in. So I suppose we were approved for service, which is daunting. Once we had the approved sticker on our back, it was a bit daunting in relation to getting on with the business at hand. So I suppose from a point of view, the next 2 slides or so, maybe just to show what my experiences have been as a member of the committee over the last, it's probably about 18 months. We had some little bit of interruption, I suppose, primarily from IT systems in relation to the hacking and the like that happened. But really, the Tusla were fantastic in the way they kept the entire team together. You know, we worked together in relation to keeping research moving over that period of time. But again, like everything, there are challenges. Challenges are opportunities to improve, and you know, the main challenges, I suppose, as an independent PPI representative, will be that listen, the nature of the research that you come across is very different. It's so varied. There's such a huge variation in relation to the type of topics, type of groups you're looking at, and the like. It's a huge responsibility being a member of a research ethics committee and making that decision in relation to whether there are gaps in relation to the research, or whether it needs further improvement, or whether it's okay to go ahead. And you know that really anyone that's putting forward research really wants to make an improvement. So I think it's important to do that in an appropriate manner. The variation in the quality of the research proposals that come forward, some can be really good, some can need further improvement, you know. So I suppose it's to be able to manage that variety, and not being an expert in the topic can be a challenge in its own right. But again, that variation. And I suppose from a PPI perspective, and this isn't Tusla specific, I suppose anything to do with research, I suppose, to try and people understand what PPI really means and what does it mean in research. And there's always that effort to try and keep educating people in relation to that, like. And I suppose the most challenging thing, I suppose, is to make sure you make enough time to do a quality review of the project proposal, so that you know, you do things right, and the researcher is getting a fair shot in relation to it. So responsibility of what you're doing and the time. So there are a lot of rewards in relation to it, and the challenges have been the rewards have been far exceeded the challenges we come across. And I suppose really from my own point of view, I really feel that we're making a difference. We're contributing to good quality research that can really make good quality improvements to the service users of Tusla, which is the most important thing. I think it's really rewarding to see high quality research that has integrated PPI, and by and large, if there's good PPI integrated into a research proposal, the quality of the research is top class. And you know, there are examples of that, and again, that's a real reward, so that people are starting to understand what's needed there. Support from Tusla management has always been there, and you know, I think it complemented the way that it's been managed, that we really feel that, you know, we're valued and we are contributing to what is required from a Tusla perspective. And the most important thing is, I suppose, the diversity in that group, that team that's there. There's young, there's older people in there, different skills being brought to it, and the opportunity to work with such a diverse group and to feel that we're really making progress is fantastic. So I think that ultimately we're heading in the right direction in relation to high quality research for Tusla, which ultimately will mean high quality service for the service user. So I suppose what are the goals that we have going forward? From my own point of view, I suppose, is to continue with, I suppose, to contribute to develop a high quality research that are going to make a difference for the service users of Tusla. They deserve that. I think it's really that's one of the key things in there. And I suppose to mature that understanding in relation to PPI, because not alone in Tusla, but in all other research, any place you really integrate PPI, you're focused on the public, you're focused on the service user, and you're involving the external in that research. The quality is so good if that gets done. So that maturity is really the ultimate goal in there. So that's my experience to date, and delighted to be part of the research ethics committee group.
Thank you, Joe. And just to finish, Joe and I have a couple of slides on what we believe have been the impacts so far on having PPI contributors on Tusla's Independent Research Ethics Committee. And I suppose it's early days, but we already see that the public contributors on the REC now have a guiding voice in shaping the research conducted in Tusla in the context of which proposals get approved through the ethical review process. We in Tusla, particularly in the National Research Office, we have drawn on our experience to embed and inform wider PPI opportunities. So one example of that is how we are working currently with the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth on the plan for their forthcoming longitudinal research and data project, which will examine the lives of children in care and adults who were in care as children. We want to embed the PPI process within the research ethics process, but also right from the start in terms of the structure and the governance of that longitudinal study. And I think that that will be really important. Following the establishment of the Independent Research Ethics Committee last year in June, the National Research Office were invited to present at a DCU seminar series on PPI in research with children and young people. And myself and two of the young women on the Independent Research Ethics Committee presented on the establishment of the Tusla Research Ethics Committee, and they talked about their experience as being former care leavers in Tusla and what that meant for them to be now on a Research Ethics Committee approving research within Tusla. You know, we feel that person-centered and ethical research influences how the Research Ethics Committee operates. Other Research Ethics Committee members have taken the learnings into their own environment, which can influence the wider research landscape. So Joe is also going to speak a little bit about that from his own perspective, but we feel that it will influence the wider research ecosystem, which is really important, so that we have a unified voice across Ireland in terms of how we do top quality PPI in research. More recently, the National Research Office and one of the members of the Research Ethics Committee, we joined a small PPI network working group on how to embed and go about recruitment for having PPI contributors on the PPI Ignite Network Public Advisory Board, and indeed interviews are taking place on that process. So we have strongly influenced that process. So it's great to see how, as I said earlier, we have been influencing the wider research landscape. So the final word to you, Joe, on what you believe have been the impacts from the public contributor perspective.
Yeah, and and finally, yeah. So I suppose that learnings from other environments, that collection of all the different inputs to the overall research is critical. So those individual differences that have been brought forward, I think, is really making a huge difference. I think there is a huge amount of awareness among the Research Ethics Committee members of what that lived experience is to the research study involves, which is absolutely the most important factor, and how that needs to be brought into the overall research program. How we run our business, the influence in relation to how the committee conducts its business is critical. And I suppose the public contributors are really having a big influence on the review and the approval process and how that research is conducted in Tusla. I think it is really having an impact, and I can see it as it's gone through in relation to the quality of the research that's coming through is improving all the time. So I think overall it's a fantastic initiative and strongly supported.
So much to Edel and to Joe for that presentation. I mean, it was really, really excellent. So we've got a couple of questions coming through in the chat here. So the first is from Andrew Murphy saying, Edel and Joe, thank you for a great presentation as ever. How have you found as one member of a 16-member REC trying to influence decisions? Any advice on what support is required on an ongoing basis to support minority PPI voice? So I think, Joe, maybe that's directed at you, maybe with Edel coming in afterwards.
Yeah, no, I think thanks very much, and I think it's a very good question. I think it's all about the way everything is structured from a point of view. You have a lot of diversity in relation to how we to the contributions that are coming from PPI. but it's having a good solid process in there, so that it's allowing us to everyone to stay, feel they're an equal partner in relation to the contribution you're making. A lot of it comes back to management, and getting that, I suppose, that everyone is respecting where everyone is coming from. I think through our induction process, everyone felt that they were a full part of the team, and really were encouraged to contribute. And within probably a couple of months, people felt very confident in contributing. And then we're now probably at a stage where, when research proposals come in, different members of the Research Ethics Committee take the lead, and that in its own right has given us all confidence. So listen, it's all about the whole process that once you're brought on board to a Research Ethics Committee, that you I was intrigued with one of the breakout groups that I just listened to, and it was all about being valued, and being seen that you're valued and your contribution is valued, and I think, small successes, if someone sees their contribution being respected in the research paper, it gives you more encouragement to contribute and to contribute. So that's kind of the way I would see it.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, that was a really comprehensive answer and an excellent one. Edel, do you have anything to add to that?
Thanks, Patrick, and it's lovely to be here with you this morning. Congratulations on the conference. I've really enjoyed all the speakers' contributions today, really learning a lot. I guess Joe has covered most of, the types of things I might have said, but just to say, like in the development and in that induction training and in our roundtable discussion, we did talk a lot about respecting voices around the table, how to include maybe less experienced voices. We did get some very good feedback and advice from our PPI contributors, both across our advisory panels and PPI networks, around things like how to support public contributors, the need for things like disclosure protocol, the need for psychological supports and so on. And I think that helped us really think through the process from the start, rather than waiting for, somebody to feel that they hadn't been heard, was that we were thinking about that and building it into the protocols from the start. And, I think, as Joe said, we have a great chair in Patricia Kennedy, and she's really superb in ensuring that everybody's voice is heard around the table.
Yeah, I think that point about it just being built into all of the processes and procedures came across really strongly. Thank you, Edel. So another question here is from Anne Cody in the HRB. It's good to see that more and more RECs are including PPI. And what was the level of interest in joining the REC? Maybe to Edel, I think maybe Edel, you would have a better sense in the broader interest in joining the REC.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Actually, we were very surprised at the level of interest from across. What we were thinking about at the time were 3 categories. So Tusla staff members, members of the public more generally who might have an interest, or former service users of Tusla, maybe children who had been in care, young people who had come through Tusla services, but also we were looking to maybe some experts in research ethics. So across those 3 categories, we were well oversubscribed. We had a very good, robust skills match interview technique and process. And actually what came about at the end is that the REC members themselves decided that there were now 2 categories, and they fell into public contributors and staff members, because I guess they felt that, if you were somebody who had an interest in research, you didn't work in Tusla, you were bringing that public voice, and that was regardless of whether you were a child or young person who had used Tusla services, a carer, a family member, or indeed a member of the public who had interest in research in our services more generally. So I think that was interesting, that was a decision that the REC members made for themselves, and that's why it seems a little bit disproportionate that we have 11 versus 5, but within that we have a very broad range. We were, I think, oversubscribed, so it was great. It was a great response.
Great. Thank you, Del. Just one final question here from Lorna Karen in RCSI. Well done to the Tusla Research Office for great leadership in PPI and ethics. No easy task given the complexity of statutory and ethical issues involved. Could I ask Edel to comment on how prior work done in the agency on participation organizational culture that appreciated the value of PPI and research ethics? Perhaps also what was the value of an organization investing in a research mentors network to fly the flag of research PPI to a very large body of staff members? So big question there, Edel, and we need a short answer, I think, because we have to move on to the next presentation as well.
Sure. Thanks for that question, Lorna. Lovely to hear from you. Just to say, I think I had outlined there in my first slide that there was very strong organizational support for what we term in Tusla participation more generally. So we were drawing on that, like the underpinning legislation. We were drawing on our participation strategy and the fact that we do have participation officers to support participation practice. And within our own research office, we have mentors who support us on the ground to, I suppose, tell the story about participation. And this then was specifically around what we were deeming participation, patient and public involvement in research. So we were refining the landscape and also align it with a wider ecosystem. So I think it was really, really important that we had a strong organizational support and structure in place that did mean it understood the importance of PPI in research, and it understood the importance of getting that voice, but we also had the legislation. So we were really using that as a springboard.
Great, thank you, Edel. Thanks. I'm actually going to ask Joe one question very, very quickly. Joe, Edel mentioned about the term patient and public involvement not being used so often in Tusla. And I know that our PPI group in the Primary Care Clinical Trials Network also maybe they're not particularly fans of that term.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it, and how do you want to best describe yourself?
Yeah, it has come up in the past. I suppose people don't necessarily like the more patient side of things, and probably would prefer the term service user. Service user to a large degree. And I think it's something we had a review there, and they joined us in relation to it to kind of get our feedback from the group in general. And it was probably a strong feeling in relation to the branding. The branding is an important word, and I suppose patient, you have patients, you have carers, you have people, you have families. So it's PPI rolls off the tongue very easily, and I suppose sometimes but it's all about that's all about the end user of the service. Are they getting the benefit from the research? And I think it's sometimes is there a better acronym that might work? Maybe there is, but it is a point that people aren't overly happy with. But it's not a showstopper, I would say.
I think we'll keep having that conversation. I think. Joe, Edel, thank you so much, and great presentations.